Greetings, everyone. I'm Nancy Bixon. I'm the Managing Director of Chaplain York, and it is my amazing opportunity to welcome you all to the online live question and answers for day 2 of IFAB Online. Yesterday's was terrific, with people having terrific questions, and just the range of people that are here to answer your questions about their areas of work or just in fundraising general. I mean, this is an opportunity which I commend to you in every way forward. Also, of course, this is not the only time that you'll have to connect with people. Chaplain York Connect is an opportunity for you to talk to people after this and throughout the year. So I'm going to turn over to Arno, who is our moderator. And just to say again, thank you so much to those of you who are joining us today. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you very much for a fantastic event and fantastic videos. So I'll turn over to you, Arno, to take on from here. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Nancy. My name is Arno Marcilassi, and I'm talking to you from Paris, France, where we happily are in a lockdown again, but very optimistic with the vaccines. I'm very happy to be your moderator today for this Q&A session. I had the pleasure to moderate the session fundraising for North America from Asia with Marina Ten Harper from University of California, Davis. She's the Director of International Development, and with Ivan Sheen from University of South Wales, Sydney. He's also the Director of International Development. It was a very interesting session, and I've learned a lot, and it was a real pleasure to get to know Marina and Ivan. They are not with us today because it's about 4 in the morning for Marina on the west coast of the US, and it's probably around midnight for Ivan in Sydney, Australia. That's why they're not with us, but they are very committed, and they were so good. So we'll start with a few questions that I already have. And the first one will be for you, Jill. You're on the East Coast, and it's very early too. Congratulations for being with us. The first question is, when you talk about having a physical space in the US, would membership of something like a bigger foundation, like Chaplain York offer, maybe, suffice, sorry?
Yes, absolutely. I was thinking actually when I rewatched the video that, I mean, I know that a lot of UK universities kind of go back and forth with, should we have a physical space? Do we really need a physical space? I mean, I can just tell you that I do think that having a physical space somewhere in the US does show a level of commitment from the institution. I just have graduates say that to me. But then I know plenty of colleagues who work for UK institutions where there isn't an office here, and they're back and forth frequently enough. But yes, I think pooling resources is a very good idea. I know that over the years, even the LSE has looked at, should we try to partner with some other UK institutions in terms of office space? But yes, I think that's a very good idea, especially to save money. And who knows what the environment will be like now in cities like New York. I mean, there might be a lot more of those opportunities that there never was before.
Thank you. The next question about Europe and Asia to Karen. Karen made the connection via one of her donors, having a connection to a wealthy family and making the introduction. How did you find out your donor had that connection, and how can you find the HNWIs, very rich people in China, if you are new to the region? Karen?
Yep, thank you. I can't speak specifically to China. That might be something Tracey could respond to, who was in the session as well. But I think I focused on the being present in the country. And so we were present in Hong Kong for quite some time. And through our network, in particular the scholarship trust that was already established, we began to really work with them a lot closer to understand their networks. And it probably was through a number of meetings and a number of lunches. And I think Tracey also pointed to how polite it can be to work in Asia, and people will always host you for lunches. And I think it was our job, or my job, to really begin to understand if there were connections there. And luckily, our host did invite a number of people along, and then it was up to me and the Vice Chancellor to then take those connections forward. So I think two responses is you have to put the time in, and then you have to also kind of understand where there is a relationship and where there isn't. And we had many lovely lunches where there were no relationships, but in this instance, we did manage to take quite a few of them forward.
Yes. People in Asia, we are all very friendly. We love to do coffee, tea, drinks, lunch, dinner, everything. So, and networking, meeting people is the way to go in Asia, like what Karen has mentioned. So if you are coming to Asia, make sure you have a connecting point and try to use that connecting point to expand more connecting points. So that's how you expand the network here. So cold calling, not really recommended. You may not get a lot of response. Best is find somebody you know, bet somebody to make introductions.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Next question for Europe to Magdalena. Could you talk a bit more about your experience fundraising in Europe via TGE? Have you found tax effectiveness to be a good incentive for European donors and a good vehicle for new donor acquisition?
So the TGI, the giving initiative that enables donors in different countries to benefit, to make gifts and benefits from a tax deduction in their own country, that's a relatively new initiative. And as far as I know, it's still to be implemented in the 17 countries that joined the first phase. So that's something that we will all be monitoring with interest over the coming months, and hopefully soon enough, the mechanism will be working and a sufficient number of countries will have joined so that it's more of a seamless experience for donors. That said, in my experience, tax, while it's definitely a consideration in terms of being able to make gifts tax efficiently, that's never or rarely the main motivation of donors, whether in Europe or the rest of the world. So we as fundraisers, in my opinion, we need to make sure that we familiarize ourselves with the different ways to make a gift and the different ways to benefit from a tax deduction. But and be prepared certainly to discuss that with the donor. But again, in my experience, that's usually towards the last stages of the gift discussion, where more or less the donor has already made the commitment in principle, and it's now just a question of deciding and finalizing the details. Also, in my experience, in different countries, the level of tax benefit, while it varies, certainly there's almost always a saving or a deduction that the donor can benefit from, and it's difficult to generalize. For example, I'm going to give a very quick example. Let's say in the UK. If the donor is in a higher tax bracket, both the organization can benefit through gift aid, but also the donor once through their tax return can equally get a top up on the tax saving. Whereas in France, and you Arnaud are probably better placed to comment on that, it just, there's still a saving, but it just works differently in terms of how and when the donor actually gets the benefit. And again, what we as fundraisers can do is we can structure the ask, the gift request differently. In other words, we can pitch the ask amount a little bit higher and be framing the ask as in making a gift at that level will actually cost you this much, and that's a lot lower than the ultimate gift amount that the organization benefits from.
Thank you very much. I have a few more questions, and I would ask you to raise your little blue hand if you want to answer. But I'd like to hear from Tracey about this one, because she addressed that in a way. This question is, you say that the pandemic has actually helped speed up the cultivation process, as people haven't had to travel to meet. Do you think when travel restriction ease, you will continue to use online so much, or will it be a combination of digital and personal, or go back to face-to-face? And since you said it's so important in Asia to meet people in real life, how do you answer this one, Tracey? And maybe other people, you can raise your blue hand.
Okay, I'll go first. I think it will be a combination, because with this COVID going on for more than 6 months now, I think people are getting a lot more comfortable using technology than previously. So I guess that would be an option that people would choose if they are not comfortable traveling. But I think a lot of us still want and prefer the actual face-to-face. In Asia, I would say in Singapore itself, well, I can't say for other countries because I can't travel around, right? In Singapore, we now do meet up quite often if we can, because the restrictions have lifted. So that has kind of changed a lot of connections in that way. I think people has been housed in their home and cooped up in their home for too long. Well, in Singapore, our houses are very tiny compared to a lot of you guys online here. Yeah, so having restricted in a restricted, very small, tiny space, when you can't go out, we all go out. So on weekends, the malls are absolutely crowded right now. So I guess when all these things get back to really normal, it will be a lot of a combination of things. There will also be a lot of people eager to meet face-to-face because they haven't been able to do so for quite a long time. And people who are not so familiar with technology are now more willing to use technology to meet people. So I guess that's how things will move on from now.
Thank you very much. Any little blue hand on that question? Nope. Okay. I have another one. It's someone, Margaret Sheehan asked this question. I can understand that there are massive differences between US and African donors, but could you give some ideas of similarities that we could use? Anybody would like to answer this question?
I think Sam, I don't know whether Sam has thoughts on this, but certainly if you look at the session I did with Ligia and Mike Muchilwa, we talked about some of the similarities with US donors in that people are very much driven by people they know, communities they know, regions they know, and they are very generous, and it is part of the culture to give. So there's quite a lot of similarity there. Also, a lot of the giving is driven by religious commitment, particularly Christian and Muslim religious commitment.
Anyone else?
Well, Lucy, it's actually interesting that you brought up religion, because one of the things that has really surprised me at LSE is that we have a faith center now. And that's one of the things that you don't really talk, I mean, you can, but even with donors that I've known for a very long time, you don't necessarily bring up religion. But the chaplain at LSE, his name is Jim Walters, and this is a while ago, probably 10 years ago, he thought that there could be a lot of donors in the US for the Faith Center. And now the donors in the US are actually some of the largest donors to the Faith Center at LSE. And it was a situation where I wouldn't have necessarily even known who the donors I had known for a decade. I wouldn't have necessarily known that they were that they donated so much to their churches or synagogues or mosques, and that now they're very engaged with interreligious dialogue at the LSE. So that's been something I'm really glad that we've been able to capitalize on.
So I'm based in Cape Town. There are a lot of similarities in institutional philanthropy between US and African foundations. I think they learn a lot from each other. So what you might have in West Africa, for example, in Nigeria, when people make donations, let's say to university, the donor likes to get a lot of recognition. There may be whole pages in the newspaper about what they've done and a lot of publicity. Whereas in other areas, people work under the radar completely. And it's very, very difficult to identify individuals and to have any idea of their giving. So I know in South Africa, we have been utterly unable to do any research into the size and scope of philanthropic giving in this country. So it really depends. One's got to look at context, understand what you're dealing with, and have different strategies for different countries.
Thank you. Anybody else want to answer that question?
Sorry, one quick thing for anyone who's interested in more information. A new center has been set up in Johannesburg at the University of Witwatersrand called CAPSI, led by Bekinkosi Moyo, who's Zimbabwean. And it's a center for philanthropy, and they are doing a lot of research on African philanthropy, and that will be generating a lot more information and data and evidence in this space for anyone who's interested. It's CAPSI is the acronym.
Okay. To go back to what Magdalena was saying about tax benefit, there's a new question. How important is tax benefits when making solicitations? That's a big one. Who wants to answer?
I'll go. In Singapore, making donations, we have a very good tax benefit actually. So for every dollar donated, you get 2.5 times tax exemption from your taxable income. So that has been quite a big help for the charity scene in Singapore, actually.
So I come at this as a private client lawyer who's obviously dealing with people's financial information, and as a fundraiser, and as a person, of course, who spent 25 years, dealing with tax effective giving. And I think that I can't imagine anybody on this panel wouldn't agree that tax is great. Making certain that people's tax effectiveness is maximized, that any amount of money they can either save or in the UK give through gift aid is there. But ultimately, like all charitable donations, it's all about the gift. It's all about the desire to give. And it's about your engagement with the person in terms of why they want to support you, why they need to support you, rather than the tax effective giving. However, so nobody gives because they're going to save money on their taxes, because they still have to give more than they save, even though Americans do tend to talk a lot about, saving money. You're not saving money. You have to give away more money to save money on your taxes. But it is worth always, though, being able to know what the tax effectiveness is in that particular country. And if you're talking about giving from a corporation, for example, to be able to give the most options, because you don't know what their tax situation is. I mean, even, for example, those organizations like the Chaplain York US UK ones, where you can offer a tax benefit to the US and the UK at the same time, or just being able to say, we have all these options for you. So whilst it doesn't, in my experience, it doesn't make somebody want to give, obviously your job as a fundraiser is to be able to give them the most options possible. Would everybody else, would people agree with that? That's their sort of experience in this?
Yeah, may I? Just
Sure.
a second. Hi. Well, in Italy, our tax deductions is okay. I wouldn't say it's great yet. And I would agree with you, Nancy, because I think the biggest motivation is actually the impact. We very rarely include tax benefits when we make an ask in Italy. We talk about that later on. And in fact, it really depends if you're making an ask to an individual or to a corporations. With corporations, we may include that in our proposals, but we never do that for individuals. So I really think it's a little bit about how you craft your ask, but it really varies from country to country, but it's never the major motivation in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, in the US, we wouldn't even really bring it up in an ask, just because everyone is like in a different, you don't know someone's personal tax situation. And so, I mean, we do have a 501c3 that most of the charitable deductions come through. But if it's a larger gift, it actually comes through our foundation, because the individual probably has a family foundation and they've already taken the tax deduction if it's in a donor advised fund or a foundation. So we don't, I mean, if someone asks me about the tax efficiency of their gift, our office would tell the donor to consult their accountant or their lawyer.
I mean, interestingly, Sweden actually ditched their tax deductions, and which has been an interesting thing for them to try that issue to see whether that worked. And my experience, someone may have better experience in Europe, is that donations have not dropped significantly in Sweden because of that.
Just tie the threads of the last two questions together. I think, working at Northeastern University in Boston and being in the profession for almost 30 years, for the first 20 or so, I was always told that philanthropy is a uniquely American tradition. And it is true that in the US, there's a lot of tax incentives for giving. But tying back to the role that culture and religion plays, what I firmly believe now is that philanthropy is a universal value shared by all the major cultures, all the major religions around the world. So that is a more motivating factor, the desire to help others much more than the tax incentives would be. So I think I echo what many people are saying, but I think that, in working in the Middle East in particular, philanthropy and the concept of zakat and giving is part of the culture. It's embedded in the culture that's much stronger than I think any tax incentive or motivation might be.
It's very interesting, this issue of tax, because in South Africa, we have an okay tax arrangement, but the money has to be spent within 1 or 2 years. We call it ephemeral money. It goes in and it's got to be spent. So what we have, it's actually affected the establishment of philanthropic foundations with endowments, because if you endow and you want to keep that in perpetuity, there is no tax benefit at all. So what we have among many foundations is a kind of paper foundation where the family puts money in every year and gets their tax benefit. But if the founder dies, or the next generation loses interest, the whole thing just collapses. There's no long-term viability for those foundations. So the tax is important when it comes to large amounts of money. And it's definitely affected the issue of endowment in South Africa.
Well, I would add something, and especially to what Robert said about culture and religion and all that stuff, about France. France is an interesting country. It has a Catholic culture and a welfare state, and both are really bad for fundraising. In the Catholic culture, money is considered dirty. You don't talk about it, it's secret and blah, blah, blah. And the welfare state means very high tax, and people who pay high tax in France consider that the state must take care of everything. So we're struggling with fundraising in France. Although we have one of the best tax incentive in Europe, and I think probably the best. It didn't really help. So yes, culture, religion, very important. We're trying to change that in France. Okay, another question around Africa. And a question that I really understand because I did some fundraising in Africa, actually in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We know that many African countries suffer with problems of corruption. How can organizations go about investing, donating, and or partnering safely with viable African organizations to ensure finances are going to the correct intended destination?
Yeah, corruption is a big problem in some countries more than others, but there are some very good civil society organizations or charities that actually spend their money well. So it comes down to doing due diligence. Of course, first and foremost, asking for financial accounts or audit reports to see whether the organization has spent its money well. But I say that with a caveat because I've known organizations that also get fake auditors. I mean, these are qualified, but they're also corrupt, so they can have books for a long time. But that's the beginning. But secondly, then looking at some of the people who funded them. For example, if they've got money from the USAID, the American government, or the EU, European Union, then the chances that the money is being used well is higher. Or the Ford Foundation, for example, the chances are higher. So it's balancing between a number of things. First, financial accounts. Then secondly, of course, then the kind of partners they're working with. Then lastly, you look in and say, then do they have their systems in place? So if it's very small and has no proper financial accounting system, the risks are higher. If there are a lot of relatives, if the husband, wife, the daughter, son, cousin are working in that setup, then the risk will be much higher then. But again, I say there are very many good organizations doing great work on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on this question?
I was going to add something, but I know Sam wants to come in as well. Just very briefly say that I think COVID has had a very interesting effect here in that people want to respond very quickly. And that has given them a challenge in terms of due diligence because they want to do the due diligence. And this is where intermediaries like Chapel in York and CAF America or CAF South Africa, and particularly King Baudouin Foundation, who are now really focusing on Africa and have facilitated a number of funders to do the due diligence for them. It's also driving a trend of working in partnership with organizations like Mike mentioned on the ground who know Africa well, like Oxfam, Save the Children, and World Vision, who in my experience are ubiquitous on the ground.
To me, it's about the integrity of the persons that work with the organization. And I've worked with several organizations here whereby the leadership, or I've been a project worker for quite long with church-based organizations, with, I mean, a range of organizations. But I mean, it is the values that the leaders and the people who work with organizations hold. So whereas there is corruption in Africa, you may also agree with me that it may be even in other countries. It is about how it is publicized. So I believe that it is not such a big problem as it is being said. Thank you.
Yeah, could I build further on that, picking back both on what Lucy said? Because very interestingly, during these COVID times, the organizations like Lucy acknowledges, donors have not had time to do due diligence. Yeah, COVID has come, the time frame has been short. And what we found is organizations that have had good relationships and are known to be credible, have integrity, have good values, have done well. And interestingly, Sam, I have a client in Uganda where sometime this year, 3 different times you were arguing whether they should stop writing proposals or not, because they got so much money in, and they thought then it was more than they could handle. So a lot of the organizations we've seen, those that where donors felt they've worked over a long time, these guys are credible, their work is good, there's impact, got benefited a lot during COVID times, but those that were known suffered a lot from it. Then coming more again to what Sam is saying in terms of values and integrity, I think very interestingly is all races misappropriate money in this continent. Very interestingly, is that surprisingly the standards are different. And I know there are times in the past we've confronted an American donor and says, look, I mean, you gave this American money and everyone knows the money was misappropriated. Why have you been quiet? Yeah, but whenever you've given this other organization that was African and the money disappeared. So unfortunately, yeah, though very few people say the standards are not the same. Yeah, but I think right across communities or races, anyone who's corrupt is corrupt. Corrupt does not mean you are African or Black African. It's right across the board. Yeah, big problem, because then again, another worrying trend is seeing staff within donor organizations also playing that corruption card. So initially, we began hearing of this 6-7 years ago, but it's building right across where people tell you, okay, especially corporates, we'll give you this amount of money that you wanted, we'll top up with this amount, but this amount of money is mine. So alluding to what Sam is saying, there's a corruption of values right across the globe. Yeah, people are getting greedy, they are too capitalistic, they're not patient, they want to drive the big SUV, fly for holidays in Dubai, New York, wherever it is. And this unfortunately is affecting the way donor resources flow. Thank you.
I just want to add to what Mike has mentioned about the corruption. It happens in Asia as well. A couple of years back, there was a lot of highlights about fake Cambodian orphanages. So there's a lot of talk about that. So if you do some research, there are still, I think, some articles available about people who are in Cambodia who actually highlighted and bring this attention to a lot of people who want to donate to Cambodia, because actually it's really true. A lot of the orphanages there are fake. And what Mike mentioned about what happens with all the money happens there as well.
I have another question regarding, again, the side effects of the pandemic and local, international, and it's important. And I'm actually working right now on a potential international campaign, and we're looking at what's happening in France in terms of who gives to what kind of organization, and if it's not turning more local because of the pandemic. The question is, looking in your magic ball, what will be the result of this pandemic on international fundraising? Will it increase because we can now do things without having to travel, or will people want to still give locally?
It's interesting because many of our clients have been asking us the same question. And the one thing that we've certainly heard that's not changed are that donors are still willing to have conversations with organizations. And I think probably those who had those stronger relationships earlier on may fare better than some who were not. But having those conversations, there's been greater access to people because they're not traveling. I think travel will still become important when we're able to do it once again. And when that does happen, the other thing I would say is that institutions need to get their story right, impactful, ensure that it's got the right level of ambition and passion, and whether that's a local or an international, telling your story and the story that you want your donors to hear will become even more important. And the third thing is what we're seeing with charities and higher education is taking a more institutional and integrated approach, which demonstrates to donors that you're maximizing your resources. So we are hearing people saying when they once just jumped on a plane without thinking about it, their organizations are holding them a bit more to account to think about those resources and how they're used. So if you're a charity working in the front line, how can your fundraising team work closer with the project team? Or if you're a university recruiting internationally, as well as having alumni and donors, again, how can you make better use of the resources? So I think it's keeping the conversations going, integrating your approach, and getting your story right.
Building on what Karen on what Karen said, which was completely right on, is also, I think the organizations that are going to come on top are those that were very quick to, I'm trying to avoid the word pivot because it's overused and very irritating, but the organizations that were very quick to adapt and to rethink and create and innovate in new ways of engaging and building long-term relationships with their donors are those that are going to fare better and those that are going to probably be a lot more successful. I'm still astounded how there's still organizations that are asking themselves if they should be engaging with donors right now, and it's been 8 months. And so that's completely baffling. It just makes me wonder what they've been doing all this time. Those are probably the organizations that are probably going to start seeing, or are probably already seeing, their fundraising decrease, and probably won't survive this current period that we're going through. So yeah.
Thank you. I agree with my colleagues that indeed the organizations need to show impact. I mean, the relationships and that should be built, but also have results in place so that they can keep afloat in terms of receiving the gifts from the donors. So that is something that we cannot, that is a given fact for the organizations to keep ahead of the game. But also, I don't know, I would take another angle that giving may not necessarily be about the income that the people have, but the willingness to give. If you have read the report about from the charities, I don't remember the organization, but it's an international report about Myanmar being one of the countries because of the Buddhism, whereby people give just because of the religious factor. So giving is humanity. The COVID has shown people that whoever you are, wherever you are, I mean, we are all the same. So I think the world may have rethought about how the position of each person in the societies where we are. And that, in my view, would make people realize that we need to care for each other because we can have a common problem that COVID has shown us. So that rethinking, in my view, will really make philanthropy gain a better place in the world post-COVID. That is my take.
Yeah, okay, look at it. I mentioned in the past that in Africa, we see a lot of institutional-based fundraising. And we think that this is generally going to slow down. Some of us think it's going to slow down for the basic reason that a lot of the countries in the world, all the countries in the world have to rethink their health systems. They have to look at the aftershocks of the pandemic on the economy. And this money has to come from somewhere. Yeah, so for those of us who've relied a lot on multilateral, bilateral funding from the USAIDs, the DFIDs and others, then we expect that there's going to be a slowdown, yeah, in the medium long term as countries seek to repair their economies and fix their health systems to be able to take the similar pandemics in future in tow. But domestically, we see more money coming in. And I think people have given much more during this COVID time because people have seen the need. Jobs have been lost. Yeah, people have needed health support, education support, all kinds of support. So that is going to continue. But I think it will kind of also impact on international giving from individuals because then combined with this underlying movement where we had seen more people beginning to look at their home countries, yeah, and beginning to think that they needed to do much more to fight poverty at home. When you combine that whole thing about helping or pumping more resources domestically to deal with development issues, and you combine it with COVID, then it's going to lead to less money going out to other countries internationally. That's what we think.
We have an interesting question from Alessandra about boards, which is a big key issue in fundraising and in the US particularly. The question is, do you have suggestions about how to enlarge US boards with motivated and effective board members for European organizations? And what about board member stewardship for major donor cultivation?
I'm very happy to speak about boards, but I know Angelica had a point on the last question.
Oh, sorry.
Do you want to make her point first?
Sure, Angelica.
Hi, thank you. I'm based in Mexico, so I work in Latin America for those that don't know who I am. In the case of Latin America, fundraising, again, is very similar to whatever you have all raised. And talking about the future, what we have seen is the giving has been very much into the problems that we're facing towards health, education. And in our presentation that we had with Ellen and myself, we discussed about the importance of collaboration and identifying the assets that, for example, US institutions could bring to Latin America, but the collaboration going across. Something that was very amazing to me was that a lot of our Latin American institutions were amazed at how they were able to reach out to alumni that live abroad, a lot of them in the US, but they also have a lot in Europe, and how these alumni really were very keen on looking for the first time towards their alma mater and finding ways of collaborating. A lot of these alumni either have businesses or they work in higher education institutions, and they were even looking for opportunities to collaborate and also to try to bring money. So if those institutions really push out that collaboration during this time, that you don't need it to travel and you were able to really have that conversations, we see that there is a great potential, even though we know that everything has become very localized, but at the same time, we acknowledge that problems are worldwide and that we need each other. And that kind of feeling of compassion and sharing has really increased that possibility of giving. So I'm the one that is a little bit of positive about how I see that collaboration and giving will be increasing, even though it will be not a lot of money, depending on the economic situation of each country, but the desire is there. So I just want to share, and I don't know if Ellen agrees with me, but that's my view, at least from the Latin American point.
And it's interesting because it's a problem that I'm facing right now for a French NGO who wants to fundraise in America. The question is, do you have suggestions about how to enlarge US boards with motivated and effective board members from European organizations? And what about board member stewardship for major donor cultivation?
I'll just make a couple of really brief comments. I'm very happy to talk to anyone more about this because it's my special subject, having been in so many organizations where the boards weren't working. One of the things, do not be afraid of qualifying any particular board prospects. Make sure that if you want them to do something, you actually are very clear about what you want them to do. And don't be afraid of graciously stepping away from each other if they're not willing. Because so many organizations make the mistake of asking rich people to come onto a board because they think they will ask their rich friends. And a lot of people are not willing to do that. And so if that's what you want and they're not going to do that, then fine. Or maybe they can help in other ways. The other thing, of course, is, there are a lot of ways boards can help that are not just about giving money or asking their friends for money. And if you want to talk more, I'm very happy to take it offline.
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Yes, I may not talk about the boards in the US, but fundraising is always the same across the board. And it has been one of my tasks as a fundraising management consultant and practitioner to bring the role of the board into the limelight for all organizations. Because yes, of course, missing the board is like having a team whereby half of the players are not doing their job. And I've been doing this through conversations and trainings, because I have an opportunity to do trainings. I've done it in Tanzania, in Uganda, internationally through the African Union. With even some South African players. So I always emphasize the role of the board. And I think as fundraisers, we need to make this, to underline this to all organizations. It has not been a practice. Some boards in my community have been there because they are ceremonial. They are in the organization ceremonially or through a connection of a friend, or somebody has retired and they want to find something for him to do to keep active. But then they, in a way, they sideline the role or the role of the organization as a fundraising agent. So I think it is very important that we always keep this point clear in whatever we do as fundraisers, as managers, that the board should function.
I'll just comment that I think what the pandemic has created for us is a tremendous opportunity to diversify our boards, because we now, what we're seeing now is at a university level, bringing on international board members meant they would have to travel to the US. Now we can, and there's not only the governing boards, but the advisory boards as well. So at the university, most of our colleges have dean's advisory councils, and we're able to diversify them as well. And what we're finding is, instead of meeting twice a year, because to bring all these people together, now they're meeting monthly. So the opportunity for engagement is much greater, whether it's an advisory board or whether it's a governing board.
Arno, it's probably, if I can jump in here for a moment on the international board side, just like Lucy, I mean, I've spent the last 25 years with hundreds of boards. And I think that in a perfect world, one would do as Bob Dietrich is talking about, having the right people to do the right things. But so often organizations can't find board members, or they have to sort of take what they've got. And that's a real, it's a real problem, because as a fundraiser, you know what you want on that board. And yet sometimes for universities, it's often easier because you have alumni, you have people you know. For charities that don't even know who the people that are going to be involved in their charity, that can be even more difficult. I think probably expectations are often that the board will fundraise for you. And my 2 pennies would be that boards do not fundraise for you. They can help support your fundraising. They can help with stewardship. They can help with cultivation. If you're doing your job right, they can be the right person at the right time to help you with making the ask. But but expecting them to be your fundraisers is the thing we hear over and over again, is that these people are going to all go do this wonderful thing for you. They won't. They can't. In most cases, if their next door neighbor may not be interested in what they're interested in, whether it's their university or saving the whales or whatever. It's a completely different relationship. And so I think sometimes and we all know that volunteer management is hard, and it takes a lot of time and effort. And you sometimes think, is it worth doing? And maybe it's not worth doing. For the right organization, maybe the board is the people who sign the pieces of paper, and you or somebody you've hired locally actually does all that bit for you. And you just say to your board, thank you very much. Here's your annual present to say thank you. So that may be one thing. But the other thing is, I was having this conversation yesterday, is that you need to ensure that your clients or you turn it around, because so many organizations spend so much time being kind to their boards, giving back to their boards, giving back to the people who are their supporters. This particular case, it was people who go on these trips to visit this particular country. And, and they're terrified to say, actually, you need to give to us. We're the ones that need stuff. We're the ones that are trying to keep our cultural heritage alive. We're the ones that you need to think about, not us constantly looking after you. And that whole relationship needs to be, and it's even harder with international boards, because they so often, you fly over, you take them out to a meal, you do all this wonderful stuff to them, and you have to think to yourself, why am I doing that? They need to be doing for us. So that would be my tuppence.
Could I respond to Nancy? And then I know, Lucy, this is your area of expertise. Lucy, you're totally cracking me up, so we're going to connect later. I agree with Nancy. And one thing that helps enormously is a job description for a board member. Why are you asking me to be on the board? Is it because you want my legal expertise? Is it because I'm a public health expert and this is a deficit in your leadership? Is it because I'm an engineer and I really understand the topography of the area you're investigating? So a job description, it can be a paragraph, but really clear and succinct. When someone is invited to be on your board, she should receive a job description so she understands what she's saying yes to. Secondly, term limits. Is it a 2-year term or a 3-year term? It should never be an infinite term, because then in 7 years, you'll find yourself thinking like, how do we extract this person, thank him for his non-service for these 7 years, and move him along? So if you have term limits, that will serve you very, very well. And then finally, an explicit expectation in writing that a board member is expected to contribute at the fill in the blank with what's appropriate. Is it the $5,000 annual gift level? Is it the $10,000 annual gift level? And universities do this all the time. One colleague who serves on a university board who is not a wealthy person said they are told, could you give half a scholarship, which is $20,000? If not, could you give a quarter scholarship? Could you give an eighth of a scholarship? We do expect you to give at some appreciable level to our financial aid program. So those are just some ideas, and I'll defer to Lucy.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't want to take much time here, but I think it's really important to point out that I was born an American. I live in London now, and I've been here 30 years, so I know Europe quite well. I think it's really important to point out that where it comes to boards, that is one of the real areas of difference between the States and the way boards are set up and the expectations of them, and pretty much the rest of the world. Europe is different, but changing. Certainly in Africa and in Asia, as far as I know, things are different. And so, for instance, one cannot necessarily expect a gift as a fait accompli. And the level of board engagement with fundraising is often nothing to only a little. And you have to think about where you are in terms of the state of the organization. So if you can even move the understanding of fundraising a bit, that can be a major piece of progress that you can achieve with your board. The point at which you can get people to give and get directly involved in fundraising really depends on the journey you're taking with your board. And I would caution against going straight into asking each member of the board to give, even though I have done that in the past here, because you can get an allergic reaction and it can undermine some efforts in the future. So you really have to judge carefully where you pitch your discussions with your board. But I totally agree with Ellen's recommendations in terms of recruitment and being really clear.
This has been very helpful. My 3 points were literally going to be the 3 points that Ellen mentioned, but I just wanted to elaborate as well that I think the original question was concerning boards where fundraising is specifically part of the remit, as opposed to a general governing board. And having worked and helped recruit a number of these fundraising boards or fundraising committees where the expectation to be helping with fundraising is explicit, I thought that perhaps I could approach this question slightly differently, and looking at the best boards that I have worked with and trying to almost reverse engineer what are the things that make them successful. And really, number one would be to have a strong chair who has and a strong CEO who are both 100% behind the fundraising agenda, so that it's not just something that is seen as being driven solely by the chief fundraiser in the organization. And then, as Ellen mentioned, in that job description, or I would phrase it a little bit more softly, I would call it a role description. Sometimes even referring to terms of reference might be appropriate, but as part of the terms of reference or the role description, be very explicit about that commitment for them to either give personally or influence a significant gift from their organization or from another organization. And the reason for that is, of course, that nobody can be an effective asker if they themselves haven't contributed. We know that. And the limited commitment, the termed commitment, that's also very important, because that allows board members to know that this is the time that they have to really make an impact.
Just one more thing on boards, and I guess I'm just reiterating Nancy's point, is that how much time it takes for the fundraisers to manage those boards. And I mean, we have a board, we have a North American Advisory Board. There is no governance role. There are 52 members. It started out as 37, and it takes an inordinate amount of time to manage this board. And we do have a job description. It's $1 million, give or get, but it's very difficult to enforce that. So we have a third who have given $1 million or more, a third who've probably given high six figures, and then another third who really haven't lived up to anything near the $1 million. So how do you then sort of try to enforce that, you know, where's your $1 million give or get within the first 3 years? So, and consistency is very important too. And buy-in from the organization is that, you know, we need the London office to be able to make this work effectively. So you have to have everyone involved.
Could I just respond?
Sure.
Jill, what you said is just something that's on a different planet from where we work. For us, boards are voluntary. It's extremely difficult to get board members, but I do work a lot with boards, and there's 3 things that I think are important to make sure that they understand governance, because that's what they're there for, which is oversight. They're not meant to be involved in operations. So number 1 is proper induction. Number 2, that job description is really important. And then the 3rd thing for me is that they evaluate themselves every year. Anyone who's not playing a role, who doesn't attend, hasn't shown interest, should be asked to retire. But the giving in South Africa, that's not going to happen. People feel that the time they give, which can be quite substantial, is their contribution. And that piece of making sure that there's good governance. If we had to go to someone and say $1 million, I don't think we even have 300 people in the country who could afford that. So it's just on a different scale and different kinds of things that people can do. The other thing I've questioned myself quite a lot is about having donors on the board, because I think there's a conflict of interest, frankly. And I think it's something, you know, I'm trying to work through myself, because I see the desirability of having large donations on boards. But what does it mean ultimately around your governance? If you have board, you know, donors sitting on the board, looking at the interests around their money versus the actual objective of the organization and how it's running. So it's just a question. I don't have an answer for myself, but it's one of the issues I am concerned about.
Thank you very much. We're coming to the end of the hour, unfortunately, so we'll have to wrap up. And thank you for the last question. It's another planet for France too. Like most members of boards here in France think that giving their time is the most they can do. Just the last question to close this very interesting session. And what are the 3 things you want people to take away from this event in terms of their international fundraising? Would like to answer that? Yeah, sure, Magdalena.
Number 1, by far the most important factor when it comes to the success of your international fundraising is how effectively you engage with your volunteer donors. Number 2, I would say, is to make sure that you secure the commitment of your organization for the longer term, so that they're prepared to look beyond the 12-month cycle and actually have sustained confidence in the success of your international fundraising and allow for results to unfold. And number 3, I would say be prepared to have a plan, absolutely, but be prepared to test continuously and adapt quickly.
Thank you.
The one thing, if I could jump in, Arno, I would say I don't have 3, but I definitely have 1, is if you're going to do international fundraising, make the commitment to it. Don't just dip in and dip out of it, because you will ruin relationships up front.
All right. We have to wrap up, unfortunately. It was so interesting. It's been a real pleasure working with you and discussing all these issues with you. Nancy, you want to say a few words for the conclusion?
Thank you all so much. It is so interesting, and to be able to hear from so many experienced and thoughtful fundraisers is a real privilege for both our listeners and for us. So thank you all very much. We're very grateful to you, and goodbye everyone, and best wishes. Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you, everyone.